Hey class, Adam Ward here. This is the first of three lecture videos I'm going to pull together about modeling and similitude, and this follows on the heels of our discussion about dimensional analysis. So these three topics sort of all go together. So a couple definitions quickly. What are we actually talking about today? When we think about modeling, we're thinking about the study of a highly controlled or simplified idealized system where we can study some phenomena of interest in a controlled way. The other sort of vocabulary term here is similitude. If you Google that, it simply means the quality of being similar. But what we're actually referring to here is the idea that we want to set up models so that observations in one system, the model, are representative of what's going on in similar systems or the real world. So today we're going to talk just a touch about modeling and similitude and how this builds on the dimensional analysis work that we've already covered. And when we're saying similar, just a reminder, what we're meaning is that our models need to be representative of the geometric scaling, kinematic scaling, and dynamic scaling. Or in other words, we need to get the shapes relative to one another, the time scales, and the forces all to be comparable in order for our model system to be representative. Learning objectives for this lecture, you can pause and read those here. So to think about this, I want to show you one of the ways that we design ships. If we were designing a full-size Canadian patrol frigate, apparently, is the picture I've grabbed, that's not something that you can just build, and if it doesn't work how you like, you can take it apart and rebuild it. It's too large and it's too expensive, and the cost of failure is too high for something to go wrong here. And so one of the important steps that happens in the design process is scale modeling of ships. And so on the left-hand side of the screen there with the bright orange hull, what you can see is actually a scale model of this patrol frigate. And so this is being tested in a tow tank or a wave tank to check that the ship is going to be stable and that you're not going to have a ship that accidentally tips over when a wave gets too large, for example. So how this all fits together, dimensional analysis, so what we were doing with our Buckingham's pi theorem, that was all about simplifying the parameter space, so reducing the complexity of the problem. This modeling step is all about how we take knowledge of one system or results from one system and make those translatable to the real world. So in this case, our model system would be the ship in the tow tank, and our real world, or often called our prototype system, is the actual patrol frigate itself. So when we're thinking about this problem, why not just use a direct measurement from the tow tank? So on the left-hand side of the screen, what I'm trying to show you is the velocity that the ship is going on the x-axis and the drag force that it must overcome on the y-axis. And so, for example, in our tow tank, you can imagine that shown as green X's here, that we could have pulled that ship at some relatively slow velocities, and that small ship would have generated some relatively small drag forces. On the other hand, the actual ship itself would travel much, much faster and experience much larger drag forces. And the problem here is this gap that I'm highlighting in blue. The data don't overlap. Not much about what you did in the prototype directly is informed by the model. Not much of your model result is directly useful to the prototype. Those 2 point clouds are really separate from one another, and so we don't know how this relationship will behave. Again, we want to know that relationship because the costs of failure and experimentation are simply too high to make these kinds of mistakes. So in contrast, on the right-hand side of your screen, let's think about this problem in a non-dimensional space. If you watch the Buckingham Pi lectures, one of the examples we looked at was drag force on an airplane, and we came up with this non-dimensional relationship with normalized drag force on the left as a function of Reynolds number on the right. And so instead of doing this in a dimensional space, what if we do it in this non-dimensional space? We would still find that our model data exist and maybe have some spread or some noise to them. But in contrast to the plot on the left, our prototype now overlaps entirely. Right? And so this gives us confidence that there's one relationship, and that one relationship in this case would be that phi, right? That relationship or that translation between our two variables. There's one relationship that governs the system. And so this gives us confidence that if our prototype for a given Reynolds number, if our model had some behavior, we expect that same behavior to occur, be scalable to that prototype. So this is why we want these non-dimensional variables. It lets us make these kinds of scale models. It lets us simplify this parameter space. So what we're actually doing here is going to have to do with these idealized relationships we developed in dimensional analysis. So here's an example. Pi1 is some function of pi2, pi3, and so forth. And again, the big advance in that Buckingham made was recognizing that we don't have to know everything about the relationship between variables. We just have to know which variables are important. Similarly, if we non-dimensionalize smartly, these relationships apply to any system that's governed by the same principles. So as an example, principles related to buoyancy and stability govern both the small-scale model of the ship and the large-scale ship that we actually build. So this is kind of the key to the way that we model. This means that this non-dimensional relationship we've derived has to be true for the model, as I've shown on the left-hand side with the subscript m for model, and the real world, the full scale, the prototype, or the subscript p. And so the key thing here is that the same relationship should exist between these non-dimensional terms in the scale model as well as in the prototype. So that's what we're going to take advantage of as we build our models. And the really core assumption here is that if you can get those pi terms equal between the model and the prototype, so written in red, for example, if we can get pi2 for the model equal to pi2 for the prototype, and pi3 for the model equal to 3 for the prototype, it stands to reason that the thing we care about, the dependent variable, the left-hand side for the model, should be relatable to the left-hand side for the prototype. So this is what underlies the way that we're going to push forward with modeling. So the thing that we actually want to predict at the large scale, at the prototype, we can do based on scale model experiments. Okay, so that's your quick primer on how modeling and similitude and scaling are going to work. Following this video, you should look for 2 more. One will be an example problem that I work through and show you how this happens. The second, an exercise where I'll point out some places that you can pause and try to work through some of the steps of this problem. Thanks for sticking with me, class, and I will see you in the next video momentarily.